Hey everybody, Nick Blazer here with another position analysis video, and we've got another position from the Rory and Marcel match. Um, all mistakes Rory made. My goal is not to pick on him here. I just thought he ran into some really instructional positions here, and so this is a tricky position where he paused to think for a while about whether he should try to cash this game now or play on too good. And I think two good decisions can be some of the most difficult to understand when we're learning the cube. We can get a feel for those take pass windows and when the double opens up. We're not used to thinking about this quite as much, and so they can be tough to figure out. So I can hopefully give some ideas for how I think about that over the board. Um, yeah, too good to double, of course, meaning that we're going to win too many gammons and we just have better equity if we just play this out and try to win that way than if we just claim our point now. But yeah, before I get into the answer there, just want to share again. Here's all the upcoming tournaments coming. Please do come visit me in San Antonio, London, or the Cherry Blossom, or tune into my channel. Not my channel. Whatever channel I share. My Facebook page. I'll have the details there for Gibraltar and the Rocky. Excited to do all that and be involved in so many tournaments coming up in the next couple months, and hope to keep growing the schedule for that too. So if you have a tournament you want me to come to, let me know. But back to this position. This one, I think in commentary, I felt pretty certain that this one looks too good to me. And Rory did make the mistake of doubling this and getting a pass out of it. And I mean, one rule of thumb that we use, and I'll show another position where maybe this is more applicable. Um, but if you're not sure, it is still nice to send these sometimes if you think your opponent might imagine that they have a take, right? There is some chance that when you cube here, your opponent will play this out instead, and you'll get an additional, value that way. So it's a nice beginner rule of thumb is to err on the side of claiming, and every now and then your opponent will reward you with a take anyway, and you'll do much better because of that. But the way that we can figure out, it's nicer to do when it's closer, by the way. And I'll show another one where it's maybe in the range where I think it's fine. Um, but but the thing to think about in this, I mean, your main concern in not playing on for this 60% gammons roughly is that, am I giving my opponent a chance to get back in this game and win? Will I lose my opportunity to claim this game for 1 point later? These are ways to think about this. And I'm sure what Rory got confused by were the two checkers behind the structure, pretty nice structure for black, and some counterplay that way if he can just enter on the ace, right? And so I think these two good decisions challenge us to think a roll ahead. And instead of thinking about the market loss, I mean, it's still like market loss, right? I think the best way to kind of figure out these two good decisions is to think about a relatively normal sequence and what the likely cube action is after that. And when I say relatively normal, I mean we don't want to think about, well, after double fours, I'm going to close them out and escape, and I'm winning a gammon for sure. Yeah, that's why we want to play on, because we have some good scenarios like that. And we don't want something spectacularly bad, like we roll absolutely nothing somehow and our opponent rolls double aces and gets back into it. Like we can kind of throw the super jokers aside and think about the more broad case very often. So let's say, of course, if we hit, I think we're doing fine. But maybe that's one to look at too. Maybe I'll actually pull this up on here too. Um, but yeah, one common scenario is that we roll something like a four or an eight that gets to hit loose as well as coming around. And of course, if our opponent doesn't hit us, we're doing great. But if they do, let's say here, we'll copy this and put it in here. So what's going on if we hit with a four and bring something down with like a 4 or 5, and our opponent just rolls a single ace? What do we have now? Do we think we've potentially lost our ability to cube this? Are we still dominating this position? Well, if we have a good feeling for this still being in the too good range, then we're not worried about that sequence so much, right? We just know there's no reason to send it this roll because if this kind of parlay takes place, I'm still doing fine. So I can just claim it next roll. So that's one way that we start to evaluate these two good positions. The other side of the coin is more like, what if we do something like a 2-1 that does almost nothing? What is we can check with XG real quick here too what it wants us to do with the 2-1. And if we play on, we can play in 9 to 6 without doubling, okay? And now our opponent rolls like a some fairly innocuous roll too that enters and anchors. It has an option of hitting, but it's not great. Okay, so he's going to come in and play to the 5. So where do we get in a position like this? If our opponent establishes the ace point, this is kind of a broad and general case that we're worried about. You know, if we still have 2 checkers behind structure and our opponent gets to anchor up, taking away a lot of our gammons, can we still claim the game after that? So if we look at that, we cannot. But we still have a good double, and we still have a pretty good position. And it's not like we've gotten into like a 50-50 game. So our opponent gets it back, but we're still not giving up so much in these sequences. And it's not even like the most likely case, right? Like in order to even get here, we have to not hit loose, and then our opponent has a 1 in 3 chance of entering to anchor. And maybe there's some worse variants of it too, like if he rolls I don't know, a 1-6 or something like this, right? So sometimes he'll get here and get to a take, but he's not like ruining, like completely turning the game around. And so it's a bit of a balancing act to look at the original position and just sort of, I don't have like numbers or amounts that I'm shooting for, but I'm trying to weigh this about like, can I in short order end up like behind in this position if I play it on? There are positions where you can be too good, and that can be the case as well. But I'm looking for how much play it feels like is left in the game, um, both in general. Like, am I still going to have a hard time next roll even if I attack there, or am I just in the driver's seat? And when my opponent does something like moderately good, I'm looking at some normal cases like that. And so I think we can see in this one that we almost always have the ability to claim the next roll. When we don't and our opponent does something really great and we do almost nothing, well, then we can still double and our opponent can take, but we're still looking pretty sharp there too, right? So this looks like a pretty safe one to take a roll on. Let's go back to his match there and look at one other two good decision that he had in the match too. That was much more difficult in my opinion. Um, so we have the same match, and I think in game 3 he has a decision in the end that is additionally too good. Could have hid the answer from you there. And this one's a little more difficult for me. What I see in this one is if I'm trying to evaluate how this looks after my opponent just enters, well, if I don't do a lot on my next roll, then to me, what this one looks like is a bit of like, I mean, in my imagination, I would be worried about some sort of, I don't know, maybe we can clean up this point somehow and our opponent just enters and cleans up theirs. Um, Whatever this looks like. I don't know if this is realistic or something like this. Or maybe they want to enter high to try to escape. Either way, what I see here is I still feel good about my position, but I do have work to do, and my opponent has counterplay with this checker back. So I'm a little bit worried about the game continuing on. And the other thing that I notice in this original position too is that like there's these 5 checkers out. So if we close our opponent out immediately, we're going to win a decent amount of gammons. If we can hit the blot in the outfield, we're going to win some gammons. But it's not all the way up by 60% like that last one was. We're actually only playing for closer to like a third of the time. And I can just feel in this position that the upside is less clearly a bunch of gammons. So I have to be a little safer to like win this in order to safely play it on. Um, so if we can look at those scenarios and see that, like, I don't know, our example was that if I roll a 5-1 here after playing on too good, let's see what happens. We're going to play 9-4 and 8-7 with it instead of stacking up. Okay, fine. And our opponent rolls I don't know what's very average for them, but let's give them a 3-1 and see what they decide to do. And so they would enter high here and try to escape. And so I think, if I'm imagining a sequence like this still looks pretty threatening. Like I'm going to have a cube. Like this is still going to be, if a take for black, a pretty difficult one. But in single checker back games, I would say we tend to have a hard time when we're outboarded and also down in the race. Like black really wants both of those. But black does have this outfield containment that's going to make it playable. So a lot of gammons in this position. But the other thing to consider in these too is the magnitude of the take that it generates, which is only 58, right? So if our opponent gains their market by like getting to a perfectly efficient take pass decision, well, we haven't really lost out anything in that scenario. If our opponent takes this, like we're giving up a very small amount of equity when things really go their way, So it does kind of feel worth playing on there. So a lot of times the two good decisions come down to the robustness of your position. They won't be as big of errors to decide not to play on if you're just always clearly winning. But that can be a way to think about it too. Is that well, I might as well take a roll because I can always claim next roll. So that sort of logic I think can help people find two good kind of plays. And we always think of it being about the gammons, but you can see as I evaluated those, I mean, it was a factor in thinking about it. I want to be thinking about two good when gammons are available, but it's not always the biggest one. I think it has more to do with how the game's going to proceed and if we're going to still be able to claim later, and balancing that. Because if our wins are too low, if there's too much left to go in the game, if we're down around like 60% with 60% gammons or something like this, well, in that case, the likelihood of a gammon is actually like our biggest piece of leverage in sending a cube and generating a pass right then. And it very often tends to be much higher equity to use that to just win the full point rather than to let our opponent win a very large percentage of games and deal with that huge swing, right? So this is a new player mistake that I hear quite often with considering too good is they just think the gammons are very high, and so I want to keep playing this game. But we need to think about the cube as like gammons are leveraged to get my opponent to pass most of the time. And it's too good when of course they have a pass and it's not leverage and they're just gonna still have a pass next roll. That's when I want to think about continuing to play on. So yeah, I hope that helps you orient yourself around one of the most difficult cube action decisions in backgammon. And I'll be back more with more position analysis videos in the near future. All right. Bye, everybody.